Hi, everyone. Welcome to the event today. This is Dr. Gareth Dyke from Bentham Science. How are you,
Hello,
Gareth?
everybody. I'm very well, thanks, Scott. How are you today? Everything going well?
Doing fantastically well, thanks. It's a beautiful,
nice.
hot, sunny day again here in Tokyo. And we're just going to give a few minutes for our participants to come in before we get started.
And I can share my screen if you allow me that opportunity, Scott.
Fantastic. Okay, try it now. Should be able to share. Fantastic.
We are good to go, I think. I'll just allow a few more minutes for our colleagues and friends from all over the world to join us in this Bentham Science event. Let us know where you're from if you're joining us, and maybe in the chat box, drop us a message, tell us where you're from. I'm from England, but I live in Hungary. Scott, where are you from?
I'm originally from Canada, although I have a British background, and I now live in Tokyo, Japan. And I do see a couple of signups from here in Japan. Welcome, everyone. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu.
Do we have the chat enabled so that people are able to chat with everybody, so they can put comments into the chat box?
We do. It's ready to go. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, do feel free to let us know where you're from, how you're feeling, if there are any problems or issues or questions that you have about the research process. We are here to help. So do let us know. What are we talking about today, Scott? What's the topic for discussion today?
Well, today is a hot topic. It's something that a lot of researchers forget about, which is the preparation stage, planning your publication. A lot of us want to just jump right in and start writing, when in fact, it does take some planning and preparation to create an effective research manuscript. So I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from you today, Professor, and we're looking forward to the event. And I assume we still have some members coming in and joining us, so maybe we'll give another half a minute just for people to come in. We've got people coming into the room still, so we'll give just a half a minute or so, and then we'll get started, shall we?
Absolutely. I mean, and if you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, wondering what to do, have a look at benthamscience.com or eurekaselect.com. I'll put those into the chat. I can't actually myself send a chat message to the whole group, so maybe Scott will have to do that. Scott, I can see that you're chatting just with host and panelists, so I don't think your messages are going out to all of our participants.
Let me set to everyone just a moment. Okay, let me set up a chat here for everyone here. Okay.
Benthamscience.com, eurekaselect.com. There we go. Absolutely fantastic. Learn about Bentham Science. That's what this is all about, as well as helping researchers to get their work published in fantastic high impact factor journals. But planning the publication is of critical importance. Shall we get started? What do you think? It's a few minutes past.
Sounds great. I think we're ready to go. Professor Dyke, over to you. Thank you.
All right, brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. I can see that we have participants from all over the world in our webinar today, so don't be shy. Do give us a little bit of information about yourself. Do let us know where you're from. Put some information there in the chat box. We'll be sharing quite a lot of information in our webinar today, planning your publication pathway to success. Everybody gets a certificate. Everybody gets a recording of this event, and everybody also gets the follow-up information that we're going to be sharing a little bit later on. What will we be talking about in our event today? It's a good question. Thank you very much for asking it. In our event today, everybody, we will be talking about journal selection, maximizing your impact, and finally, a little bit about your title and abstract, some of the key areas aiming for impactful publishing. So journal selection, maximizing your impact, and thinking about an impactful title and abstract for your next article, which of course you will be publishing in a Bentham Science journal. Now, what's the point of all of this? It is to help you be as effective as possible as an academic. Putting Bentham Science to aside for one moment, our goal is to help researchers with their writing and publishing. We know that English is often a blocker to publication success. We know that understanding the publication process is often an issue for our colleagues around the world. So in this presentation, Planning for Success, we will talk about journal selection, maximizing impact, and titles and abstracts for impactful publication. Thank you once again, everybody, for joining us. Do not be shy. Do put your comments, questions in the chat box, and we will move on. There will be lots of time for questions at the end of our event today. You're also probably thinking, who are Bentham Science publishers? Well, Bentham is a leading scientific, technical, and medical research publisher with more than 160 online and print journals. I know, 160. That's 126 hybrids, so journals that publish without a fee, journals that publish without a fee, but that can be converted to open access, as well as 40 open access journals and more than 1,300 online and print books. So do have a look at the options that we have available. And I can see that our colleague Detimbir David is pointing out that the chat box is not enabled for everybody. So maybe, Scott, you can have a look at that.
Take care of that. Apologies, everyone. We'll get that going for you. Thanks.
Fantastic. So do tell us where you're from. Do tell us if you have issues. Do tell us if you're looking for a journal for your next research publication. We will be talking about that in a little bit. And have a look at Bentham Science. BenthamScience.com, EurekaSelect.com are already in the chat box for you. And if you're sitting there thinking, hey, I'm a librarian, don't worry, we've got information for librarians as well. Scan this QR code and you can get access free to all of Bentham's content for 3 months. Free. That means without having to pay a single penny piece. Access to all of Bentham's content for 3 months on a no obligation trial. So do have a look at that. Something I forgot to mention previously is that of the 160 Bentham journals, more than 40 have impact factors. So if you're looking for a great place for your next publication, researchers do have a look at those Bentham journals, because more than 40 of them have impact factors. So that's often something that people are looking for when planning a path to publication and planning a journal. So let's get going with our first topic in our webinar presentation today, which is, of course, journal selection. Did you know that more than 2 million academic research articles are published every year? Welcome. I can see people are putting comments in the chat. More than 2 million research articles are published every year, and 30,000 published every week or so in just the medical sciences. And I can see comments coming in also in the Q&A box. We'll get to those at the end of our event. Provide you with research collaboration and opportunities, especially if you are a PhD student. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for that. When researchers think about journal selection, and by the way, we put this at the beginning of the research process because journal selection should be what you do first. It should be what you do at the beginning of your journey of a research paper. It should be the first thing that you think about. Before you start to write, think about your journal, your target journal, because that makes the writing and publishing process much, 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 much more effective. The majority of successful writing and publishing academics, they think about a target journal before they begin to write. And that's because every journal is different. The kind of paper that you might be putting together from your next piece of research is very journal dependent. So talk to others, talk to colleagues, talk to us. We can help. Scott and I are here to help you with your research questions, with your research aims. Just get in touch with us. We'll help you with all of this. sorting out a target journal, very, very important. And often researchers, of course, they write up a paper and then they think, where am I going to submit this paper? And that's the wrong way round. If you have a target journal in mind before you begin the writing process, many of your questions about that writing process are answered. The structure, what goes into the different sections, for example, have a target journal in mind before you begin to write. And we're going to give you access to our fantastic bank of email templates at the end of this event so that you can use them to get effectively communicating with editors, making pre-submission inquiries, writing to editors and saying, hey, editor, I've got a piece of research that's ready for writing up. Would it be something that you would be interested in seeing submitted to your journal? And that's a very important early step that many researchers just don't take advantage of. Writing emails, making pre-submission inquiries, getting a journal lined up for your research before you begin the writing process. Effective journal selection happens early in the process. It's a marriage between research and publication. Authors think about impact factor. Of course they do. They think about reputation. Of course they do. They think about the reach of a particular journal within their field. And they think also about open access. If you have questions about any of these issues, again, we are here to help. You should be picking a peer-reviewed journal. All of the Bentham Science journals have extremely rigorous peer review with fantastic international editorial board members, all with H indices greater than 5. So that's important too. Your impact factor, your reputation, the reach of a journal within the field, and whether or not it's open access are key indicators for success for you as a researcher. So let's start thinking now, as we plan our next publication, about the journal selection step at the very beginning of that process. And that's why Scott and I have come up with a number of rules for journal selection, aiming high, choosing appropriately, and attending training courses like this one, webinars and training courses to learn about selling and managing your submissions to journals. Because of course you can't always publish everything that you write in Nature, the BMJ, the Lancet, fantastic high impact factor journals, but you should always be aiming for the best possible journals with your research. And we are here to help you learn to sell and manage your submission, providing you also with a range of tools like the fabulous Edance Journal Selector tool. If you're not aware of this, jump over there on Google, have a look at the Edance Journal Selector tool. It is the only tool currently out there in the world today that is independent of a publisher. So it's well worth looking at because you type in a few keywords, you upload your own abstract from your article, and it gives you journal selection advice. So that's well worth looking at. And I see that Scott has pasted the link in the chat. So do have a look at that. The world's only publisher independent journal selection tool as we aim high, choose appropriately, and learn to sell and manage our submissions to international journals. Because authors tend to want speed. They want their papers to get published as fast as possible. They want reach and readership. They want as many people as possible to be reading those articles that they publish. And they also, of course, want a decent impact factor. That's what we all want. So finding a good journal that's not too expensive if it's an open access journal, of course, and we'll come back to that in a moment, but finding a good journal that fits all of our criteria as researchers, that's also on our national approved list, potentially, of journals where we can publish our work is absolutely critical. Speed, a decent impact factor, and high reach and readership, and very, very key to do this at the beginning of the process. Your journal plan, your publication plan begins, of course, after you've collected data, after you've analyzed your data, you start to think about your journal for publication. And don't forget as well about open access journals. Lots of authors have questions about open access journals. Probably the most common question that we get from researchers is asking us to explain the difference between an open access journal and a traditional journal. BenthamOpen.com gives you the list of Bentham Science open access journals, so do have a look at that when you have a chance. But we're all familiar with traditional academic journals. That's, of course, where you publish a paper in a journal that's sold, then the content is sold back to subscribers, libraries, medical schools. We're all familiar with those. You've got to be behind your university paywall, behind the subscription wall to get access to certain journals. So you publish for free. The publishers make money by selling that content back to libraries and medical schools for a subscription fee. That's a traditional journal. And in more recent times, we've had the option as researchers to convert those kinds of journals to open access by depositing a very late stage draft of the work that we've done on our own website, on a subject repository like PubMed Central, on a preprint server like Archive or Research Square, or on a site like ResearchGate. So you are converting your traditional article to green open access by making a final stage, not the published version, but a final stage version of your work available on a repository, on an archive, on an open access website where anybody can get in and get access to the content. That's green open access. Fully gold open access journals, Biomed Central, PLOS, the Public Library of Science, Frontiers journals, MDPI journals, scientific reports, Nature Communications, the journals on BenthamOpen.com, for example, are fully open access. Anyone can access the final published version of the paper that's been peer reviewed on the website. But the big downside, the big issue for authors around the world with open access is, of course, that there is a charge, an article processing charge for that publication. So that's the difference between traditional and fully open access journals. And one of the gifts that we've got for you if you're attending this webinar and you get in touch with us at the end is a discount on your APCs, on your article processing charges, if you decide to submit a paper to a Bentham journal over the next month. Do get in touch with Scott or I if you'd like to make a submission to one of the many, many, many Bentham journals, and we'll give you a discount on those publication fees. Just get in touch. We'll give you our emails a little bit later in this event, but understanding open access is critically important to successful research as you select a journal. And we also recommend, as I've already mentioned, in the journal selection process, making pre-submission inquiries. You can speed up the process by sending pre-submission inquiries. We recommend that you write to editors with the template that we'll give you at the end. We'll write to editors, write to as many as you like, selecting a target journal effectively. If you've got content, if you've got a topic, if you've got a title or an abstract, reach out to editors and give them that information. Make a pre-submission inquiry. Very, very, very effective strategy. Dear editor, I would like to ask you if you'd be willing to consider a paper on this particular topic for consideration in your journal. And they may say no, they may say great, get in touch, or they may say we have another journal in our family that would be suitable. But by doing pre-submission inquiries, you speed up the process considerably and you're able to get your work successfully submitted at a journal of your choice more and more effectively. So let's have a think about doing that. Journal selection, very, very important, should happen at the start of the process using our rules for journal selection and thinking about those characteristics that you want as a researcher for your next publication. That's also very, very critically important. We are now going to move on and talk about maximizing impact with our research. We've talked about journal selection. Let's talk now about maximizing our impact as we write and publish work and we go for publication with our articles. So 3 things to think about before you start to write your next paper: your message, your audience, and your structure. You are going to think about these, I hope, before you begin to write, because they are very, very, very important. What's your message of your paper? Who are your audience? Which target journal are you going to choose? And what will the writing structure be? Do think about these 3 issues before you begin the writing process, and build, as you do, your mentorship group. This means the group of people that you know in your research area who could be potential peer reviewers for your next article. We're going to talk in a moment about how you can make international colleagues more aware of you and aware of your work. But I would also say, as a strategy for getting your work out there and getting your work known about, preprint servers are well worth using. But if you forget everything else from this presentation today, do try to remember a message, your audience and structure before you begin to write your next article. And writing and submitting your work is all information that we can provide in training courses. If you'd like us to come along to your university, remotely of course, and give further training courses, that's something else that we'd love to discuss with you at the end of this event. But let's have a think, as we maximize our impact as researchers, how we are going to do that. And many researchers, they think only about scholarly impact. They think only about academic impact. They don't think in a more broad, more rewarding academic publishing experiential way about the economic and societal benefits of their work. And you should be, as a researcher working these days, thinking about how your work makes a difference to the lives of ordinary people, as well as just its academic impact, as well as just the impact factor of the journals that you're choosing for your publication. That's also critically important. But we do think about R indices and H indices. Our institutions do count citations. They do look at circulation, but your research circulation does not necessarily translate to impact. Let's think about this for a moment in this presentation. Is your work being published in a leading international journal actually being read by others? Is it actually translating to impact? How many people are actually going to use your paper as well as just cite your next article? And it's very, very, very field dependent, as you can see here on this table. If you're working in the health sciences, sciences in general, engineering and architecture, then you do have lots more options for publishing your papers in Scopus listed journals. So Bentham Science up there at the top, science and health sciences in particular, all of the journals are in Scopus. So you've got lots of choices when picking a journal to maximize your impact. But as our dear colleagues in the arts and humanities will tell us, potentially far fewer options for academic articles, journals that we can choose to publish our work in with impact factors in these other areas. So keeping that in mind, it's also important to look at citation analysis. And we've all done this. We've all investigated this. We're all aware potentially of our H indices, our R indices. What are citation metrics for the journals that we choose to use, and so on. This is a way of measuring the impact of an author, an article, or a publication by simply counting the number of times that that author, that article or publication has been cited by other works. And we all do this all of the time, but let me remind you that it's just part of the story when you think about your impact. What about your socioeconomic impact? What about the difference that your work is making to the lives of other people? But be on ORCID, have a Google Scholar profile, investigate Scopus, look at the Web of Science, see how other researchers are finding you, how other researchers are looking at your work how other researchers are jumping in and finding you as an academic. You should have an ORCID ID. You need one for submitting articles to most academic journals. You should have a Google Scholar profile or a website so that others can discover you and learn about your research. So these are important tools for spreading out your message because, of course, academic impact is increasing in its importance. We are still all measured on this basis, even though I do want to encourage everybody listening to this that we are much more than that as researchers. When you build a project, think about the design. How are you representing your results? How are you then going to go and engage with researchers around the world? What early impact are you creating with each of your research projects, and how will that be reflected and sustained? We get this source material from a great company called Fast Track Impact. Do have a look at them as well. But you're going to design great impactful research projects representing your work, engaging with researchers around the world, creating early impact, which is then reflected and sustained. You have a choice as a researcher writing up your articles. You can go for a boring paper like the molecular genetics of tobacco in this example that only other researchers working on the molecular genetics of tobacco are going to be interested in reading. Or you can write papers that address big, broad, interesting topics, in this case, the public health benefits of tobacco, how your research results relate to a big, broad question that lots of other people are going to be interested in reading. And by the way, when selecting a journal, the first stage of our training presentation, the first stage of the research journey, you need a clear message. And this is where the message comes from. This is where the message is important. If you have a message for your next paper that lots of people find interesting, so not just a study on the molecular genetics of tobacco, but a study that relates my results from the molecular genetics of tobacco to the wider public health issues that smoking creates, I'm going to get that paper published in a much broader, much more impactful journal with a higher impact factor. So think about your pathways to impact as you plan your research articles. We have a number of impact checklists. Here's one that comes from Kudos. What are you going to do during the project? What are you going to do on publication? And what are you going to do on an ongoing basis to promote and build your research impact and your research reputation? Do think about these tracks, these impact checklists, these pathways as you go through your research journey. And as you promote yourself, know about which channels other researchers in your field are using. Know about which channels other researchers in your area are on. Could be LinkedIn, could be WeChat, could be Instagram, could be ResearchGate, could be the channel formerly known as Twitter, for example. Engage with your audience in your research area using the correct promotional channels, because impact of your research is a journey. It's not just what happens when your paper gets published and gets cited, and maybe you get talked about on TV, or maybe there's a few radio interviews, showing my age, but you will be thinking about inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts over the lifespan of a research project. And this is a great slide, again, from Fast Track Impact. We'll give you this presentation. We'll give everybody access to a recording, of course. Have a think about this. Wouldn't it be fantastic to have an image like this in your next grant application or in your next job application that shows how you are thinking about your research over the whole lifespan of the project? Of course, research projects finish with publications, and they move on to outcomes and impacts. But the life of the project is much more than that. And so it's important, isn't it, to improve your engagement skills. You may be able to explain the value of your work. You need to justify your funding and explain why an institution or a postdoc program should hire you. justify your funding, show the impact of your research. You can learn to get better at public engagement. You can communicate your findings more effectively as a researcher. We give you strategies, we give you ways to assess the impact of your research. What attention are you garnering? What interest do you have? What desires do people have when they read your paper? Are they downloading it? Are they talking about your work on blog platforms? Are they talking about your work online? And what actions are resulting from your work? Where is your impact? When we ask academics about their impact, usually they talk about impact factors. They talk about citations, as we've discussed. They do not tend to talk about the bigger picture. And so you can make a difference. As a researcher, you can make yourself differentiated from other researchers in your field by thinking about impact in a broader sense. In your next job interview, what's your impact? What difference are you making to the lives of ordinary people? And we do encourage you, therefore, to develop your presentation skill set, to become a great storyteller. Going back to my example about tobacco and molecular genetics, how great would it be if you had some stories from the research, from the way that the data were collected, from the individuals that you interacted with, that you could talk about in conferences, that you could talk about in your articles. Your storytelling presentation skill set is absolutely critical as well. And don't forget that most research is actually incremental. This is one of my favorite tips for research publishing and writing. Most research builds on things that people already know or that they think they already know. Neil Gaiman said this in a book that he wrote with Terry Pratchett, one of my favorite fantasy fiction authors. People like to be told what they already know. What people think they want is news, but what they really crave is information about things they already know to be true. So keep this in mind when writing your papers and dealing with peer review. You are going to be telling people things that they already think are correct. You want people to read your work and think, I agree. Absolutely, that's what I think is the right answer. Building on things that people already know as you manage and build out your research incrementally. So we've talked about journal selection, the first stage of your publication planning journey. Don't start writing until you have a target journal in mind. And I wonder if you can cast your mind back and think about those 3 things that you need to know before you start to write. Number 1, your message. We've talked about how to develop that in the context of storytelling and research ideas and putting your work out there into journals that will be read by the maximum number of people. Message, audience, and structure. Of course, audience is your target journal. Structure for your writing comes from that target journal. So the 3 things to know before you begin to write: message, audience, and structure. Let's now talk about writing an impactful title and abstract. Of course, as you start to build out your research paper, these are often things to think about at the outset or polish over the lifespan of the writing of your project, things that you may want to have at least in draft, ready to send out to your editors when making pre-submission inquiries. So let's talk a little bit about title and abstract writing. Of course, we have vast amounts of content, Scott and I, on the writing and publishing process. So if you're enjoying this presentation, you'd like to learn more, you'd like us to come online and share more information with your students or your colleagues or your research group or your university, just get in touch with us at the end of our presentation today. In terms of article structure, then, this is an overview of the structure of a full research article. And you'll notice that there are 2 distinct sections: the title and the abstract, and the main text. And that's because the title and the abstract and the keywords perform a very different function in academic publishing to the main body text of the paper. People find your work, they search for your work, they discover your work based on the title, the abstract, and the keywords. So these take a lot of work to get right, and they need to be easy for indexing and searching. Don't forget, of course, most people don't read more than just the title and abstract of your paper, and that could include peer reviewers and it could include editors. So let's think about what makes a great title. It should be short. It's got to contain the fewest possible words that adequately describe the contents of your paper. Keep it short. The main issue, the subject, accurate, unambiguous, specific, and complete. No infrequently used abbreviations. I see papers all the time that are just difficult to understand because they've got horrible abbreviations and acronyms in the title. You're immediately narrowing down your target audience to people who are only interested in the molecular genetics of tobacco. What journal can you publish that in? Well, it's going to be a very field-specific journal. We're aiming for high impact factor. We're aiming for maximum readership. We're aiming for Nature. We're aiming for Science, attracting readers' attention, getting people interested in reading your paper, keeping it short, concise, informative, the most important words related to the topic, enticing readers, but without giving away the punchline. You don't want a declarative title. My new drug is the cure for cancer, because then nobody's going to read the rest of the article. If you just tell them the answer in the title, a declarative title, that's not going to attract readers to come and look at the whole of your article. So perhaps something non-declarative, a new drug provides a solution to X, Y, and Z. So people think, oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to have to read more. But don't be over sensationalized. Think about being attractive, enticing, alluring, getting people interested in potentially reading your article. And we just give you a few examples from some of the Bentham journals, the top impact factor Bentham journals: Current Neuropharmacology, impact factor 5.2, Medicinal Chemistry, impact factor 4.7. Great places if you are listening to this and these are your subject areas. Why not have a look at these journals for your next paper? And as I mentioned before, if you get in touch with Scott or I over the next few hours, we'll give you a super smashing discount for your publication in some Bentham journals if you can get your paper submitted over the next month. Fantastic. So we've talked about titles. What about your abstract? Very, 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 very important. The quality of an abstract will inform an editor's decision. What will happen to your next submission going to an international journal depends upon your abstract. Why is that? Well, ask yourself the last time you read all the way through an abstract. You don't read all the way through papers. You often just read the abstract. So it's got to be honest and precise. Standalone for search engines. It's sometimes all people read. No technical jargon, short and specific, and citing no references. A great abstract is absolutely essential to ensuring that your paper has the maximum chance of acceptance in your target journal. And many authors write their abstract in a rush, almost as an afterthought. That's a mistake. It should be a concise, standalone piece of writing with a very clear message. It's got to accurately reflect the full text of the paper. Always imagine that you're writing an abstract for a conference, and that's all that people are going to read. That's what you have to keep in mind when putting together any abstract for any academic article. You can use the fantastic 4-question technique down here at the bottom of the slide to write your next article abstract. Write down these 4 questions. Why did you do the study? What did you do? What did you find? And what did you conclude? Why did you do the study? You answer that. What did you do? You answer that. What did you find? You answer that. And what did you conclude? You then delete the questions. You've ended up with about 100 to 150 words. That forms the basis of your next abstract for your next academic article, because above all, structure and story, message, audience and structure, absolutely critical for publication success. Readers need to know where they've come from, where they are now and where they are going. A plot is needed in your academic writing, message, audience, and structure, keeping your readers engaged, having a great impactful story, a great impactful message, a fantastic target journal, and a leading, winning, alluring, and enticing abstract and title are keys to success. Don't forget that we're here to help you, to give you the information that you need to prepare to write, the right mindset for writing, things to think about before you begin the writing process, your topic, identifying your audience, identifying your purpose, and gathering supporting details. Scott and I, Bentham Science, we're always here to help you with your writing and publishing process. Here's a roadmap that we put together to help with the process. Initially, you prepare. You think carefully before you even put pen to paper. You think about your target journal. You then think about selling yourself and selling the message of your research, capturing an editor's attention, as well as his or her readership. Of course, that's what editors care about above all, publishing work that will be attractive to their readers. You then need a structure, having a clear structure so your readers never get lost. And then, of course, effective English writing. And we are available anytime to provide you with simple rules that can make a huge difference. Indeed, have a look at the Bentham Science YouTube channel. Get in touch with us if you'd like more recordings of previous Bentham webinar events to learn the different stages of the roadmap to success. We have talked today about journal selection. Do it first. Message, audience, and structure. We've talked about maximizing impact, getting a good story together that will sell your work to a leading journal. And we've talked about titles and abstract writing for impactful publication. We've just scratched the surface in this presentation today. Scott and I are always available to provide you with more information. Indeed, if you would like us, as I've said, to show up online at your research group, at your university, at your college, your medical school, your library, we would love to do that and provide you with additional training and support to enhance your academic publishing success. Because the point of all of this is to help colleagues to be more effective as academics. Of course, we've got lots and lots and lots and lots of opportunities for engagement at Bentham Science. You can find us on all of the usual places, including the platform formerly known as Twitter. Do get in touch. Do follow us on LinkedIn. Do watch our YouTube videos. Do write us messages on the platform formerly known as Twitter. Do have a look at our WordPress sites where we put regularly new content to help researchers. And if you are a Facebooker, give us a few likes on Facebook as well. Thank you very much for listening. Just before we go into our Q&A session, don't forget, librarians, if you're out there, librarians, you can scan the QR code shown here on the screen to get your institution or your library, your medical school, your college, access to Bentham content with no obligation for 3 months. That's more than 120 journals, 40 of which have impact factors, loads and loads of great content, lots and lots of information, new articles, expanding for free your journal content collection. And with that, I will say thank you very much for listening. I hope everybody has an absolutely fantastic day, and let's turn the floor back over to Scott in case there are any questions from our audience today. Thank you once again, everybody, for the opportunity to do this. Let me just bring back up that slide so you can think about what we've been talking about today. Do we have any questions? Let's have a look in the Q&A.
We do.
Yeah,
Professor Dyke, we had a couple of interesting questions, and thanks to everyone for answering the poll questions. It was very interesting to see how people answered, and great to see people using citation analysis tools. And I was also surprised to see how many people in our group today feel confident about communicating your research to the public. Usually these polls much lower, but today our group seems much more confident about presenting your research to the public, so that's fantastic. And we did have a question, Professor Dyke, from Ella. Ella, I was just chatting with Ella about this, and Ella says, I had submitted a manuscript topic to BMJ in 2019, but because of the difficulty finding peer reviewers at that time, coming into the pandemic, they weren't able to find peer reviewers for the paper. So Ella's question is it still suitable to resubmit to the same journal, to BMJ? Any thoughts on that, Gareth? Sometimes submissions get interrupted. Life happens mid-submission. Any thoughts or advice as a journal editor for Ella in resubmitting, whether it's worth resubmitting to the same journal or perhaps submitting somewhere else? Any thoughts on that, Professor?
That's a great question. Thank you for that question, Ella. I think it's a great, and you should be very proud of the fact that the editor sent your paper out for peer review at a prestigious journal like BMJ, because of course they'll be rejecting 90% or more of submissions. So congratulations on that step. The fact that he or she, the journal editor, couldn't find peer reviewers, I think is their problem, not yours. But at this point, I would definitely write an email to the editor, reminding them that 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they had considered this study interesting enough to take it on for peer review. So you could write back and say, I've added to it, I've updated it, it's still a very relevant research question, still very important, and put some peer review suggestions into your pre-submission inquiry email to the BMJ editor. You lose nothing by trying to do that. And I think that would be fantastic. And do let us know how you get on, because we'd celebrate that. We'd be very happy to hear your success story with that. I'm sure you'll have a positive response. So thank you for that question.
Great question. Thank you, Professor Dyke. And we also had several guests today talking about the need to find research collaboration opportunities, especially for PhD networks. This is a question we get quite often, isn't it, Gareth? How do we seek out and find those collaboration opportunities? And we encourage researchers to do that, especially with researchers in other areas of the world. Any advice for our guests today that are looking for collaboration opportunities?
That's a great question. I mean, absolutely, you should be on like different social networking groups in your research area. Like there are a number of email listservs potentially in different subject areas. I'm thinking of one in pharmacology that I see a lot of activity on. Find other researchers in your area on LinkedIn. Find them on Facebook and connect directly with them. I think it's absolutely fantastic when younger researchers reach out to older, more experienced colleagues and talk about research. It can be daunting to do that, but you shouldn't be worried, because people love to talk about their research. And there's nothing that a more senior academic is going to like better than being contacted and told how amazing they are and how much you'd like to work with them. So yeah, contact with people, network with people using social media and other tactics. But yeah, you know, please get in touch with us if we can help with a specific subject area. But I think just being showing your research, being open with your research, sharing online and elsewhere is a great way to start. Thanks for that fantastic question.
Great question. And we've got a couple other questions coming in. Do we have time, Professor? I think we do, right?
Of course, absolutely. Yeah.
Question from Irene. This is a great question. What is a decent impact factor, and how to decide which journal to choose just from looking at the impact factor? Ooh, this is a great question.
Yeah, really. It depends upon the subject area, of course. So some areas, let's look at oncology, for example, will have some journals with huge impact factors. And, you know, if you think about journals like Nature and Science, they're up there with an impact factor of about 40, something like that. But many of the medical journals have high impact factors because lots of people are interested in reading about that kind of research. And that's all an impact factor really is, Irene, a metric that shows you how many people are likely to read that particular journal or article or researcher, because of course, there's 3 different kinds of impact factors for researchers, H-index, for journals, journal impact factors, and article impact metrics as well. So to answer that question would be very field dependent, but there are going to be places where you can go to see rankings of journals in your field, have a look on Web of Science, have a look on Scopus. We can help you with access to those tools if you need to get in. But thank you so much for that question. Great question.
Great question. Thanks, Irene. We've got a couple other good questions here. Here's a question about, oh, I think we've just lost it here. Let me take a look at the Q&A section here. Here's a question from Udit, our friend Udit. Hello, I often get into situations where researchers ask me if the time taken for acceptance or rejection of the manuscript could be reduced. As in India, maybe like many places, promotion of ranks, completion of your PhD depends on the articles published per year. And so with a delayed response, that can interfere with the number of publications you need to get out in a year. So it's the classic question of publish or perish. So I think the question is, when selecting a journal, time to publish is an important consideration, isn't it, for many people who are on a timetable to publish a certain number of papers within a year? Any comments on that, Professor Dyke?
Yeah, well, the best way to deal with that, Udit, is to communicate with your journal editor. And so, I mean, what you shouldn't be doing is just submitting papers to journals and then sitting back and waiting for the papers to come back from peer review. Keep in mind that on average, journals are dealing with the whole process, different speeds, of course, and you can find out about the average time to publication for different journals on their website. At Bentham Journals, it's about 3 to 4 months, usually, between receiving the paper, sending it out for peer review, and eventually getting the article published. But if that time starts to slip, if you end up waiting for more than 6 to 8 weeks, let's say, for a paper to come back from peer review, get in touch with the journal editor. Scott and I always like to say, don't wait, communicate with your journal editors, because that is how to manage that process. Have a look on the Bentham Science YouTube channel. We've got lots of other presentations on exactly this topic, and we'd be delighted to share email templates with anyone listening to this, helping you with that communication process, because you don't want to write an email, where's my paper? Where is it? You need to be polite. You need to share information with the editor, maybe give him or her some further suggestions for peer reviewers. Great question. Thank you, Edith.
Fantastic question. Thanks for that. And we have time for one more, Professor?
Absolutely, of course.
This is an interesting question. This is a question from Zainab, and the question is, I wrote a master thesis and got an A for that in 2012, but never had a chance to submit it. Do I have any chance to submit it and get it accepted? Interesting question. If you've got a master's thesis that you have never published and it dates back, well, I guess it's more than 10 years now, any chance of publishing a paper like that now?
Well, there's two things you could think about here, Zainab. The first might be publishing it as an ebook, okay, which of course would not be peer reviewed, but is something that we could, for example, do for you. We publish at Bentham Science ebooks without charge to you, the author, okay? So you could have a look at benthambooks.com if that's a route that you're interested in following for publication. So in that case, I would say, though, that if it was written in 2012, you're going to need to update it somewhat, because that's more than 10 years ago. So depending on the subject area, again, like some subject areas, of course, have not moved since 2012, but I doubt that yours is an example of that. Update it, and then maybe also think about publishing it as a peer-reviewed article or a series of peer-reviewed articles. But in order to assess that, we'd need to see it, we'd need to talk to you about it, we'd need to have a look at it, because of course it might be a master's thesis that just deals with one question that would be translatable just into one peer-reviewed article, or it might have several potentially interesting sections. So yeah, great question. Depends what kind of publication you'd like to achieve, but do reach out to us. I've put my email in the chat a little bit further up as well, if anyone wants to drop me a line. Gareth@benthamscience.net. Scott's posted the Bentham Books link, and we will of course be sharing certificates and copies of this presentation as recordings with everybody who attended today. So fabulous. Thank you so much.